stories. This happened to me one crisp autumn morning while I was walking to my bus stop. When I was a freshman in high school, I played the cello, still do, and my school orchestra had signed up to play at a local school orchestra festival that day. So I was a bit dolled up with makeup, a nice twisted hairdo, a floor-length black dress, and a pair of shiny flat black suede shoes. I decided not to take my cello and use my school's cello instead to avoid the risk of damage and theft. Well, it turns out that my cello wasn't the only thing I needed to worry about being damaged or stolen that day. I said goodbye to my family as I rushed out the door, binder in arm and backpack in tow. When I got past the edge of my lot, a white unmarked delivery van without a license plate drove past me and slowed down for a moment, as if the driver was looking at something. Wearily, I quickened my pace as I watched the van drive to the end of my cul-de-sac and turn around. I noticed that the van was hanging back a ways and was going slowly. I thought, okay, this is creepy, and walked even faster. Then the unthinkable happened. I tripped over my dress and my binder went flying out in front of me, spilling all of its contents. I heard the van speed up behind me as I scrambled to pick everything up with my bloody hands and run away, but it was too late. The van had caught up with me. The driver opened his window. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride to school?" he said. He looked to be about 30 or 40 years old, had ear-length reddish-brown hair, brown eyes, and skinny build. His eyes were bloodshot, and his movements were very fast, as if he was tweaking out on some sort of stimulant. "I'm fine," I said. "Just leave me the hell alone." "Are you sure that you don't need a ride?" he called as I walked away. "Yes, I am sure. Now stop bothering me before I call the police," I exclaimed as I tried to run away. Thankfully, my dad's friend was working in his front yard and came to my aid when he realized that I was in trouble. The creep tried to convince him that he was just trying to help me, but seeing how distressed I was, the fact that he kept following me put up his red flags, and he didn't buy it. My dad's friend told me to run inside and get washed up while he called the police. As I did so, the creep tried to get out of his van when my dad's friend slammed the door shut, saying, "If you get out of this van and you try to hurt that girl, I will beat your sorry ass. You need to leave now." I told my dad's friend that I still wanted to catch the bus, thinking that being among friends would help me calm down. So he agreed to watch over me until the bus got there. There was one other girl at the stop, and that was some comfort, but the creep had the nerve to come back. When he drove by the second time, I ran for the nearest ditch and started sobbing. I was scared for my life. I had previously been in an earthquake, and this experience was 10 times scarier than that. The other girl at the stop ran over to me, asking what was wrong, and I told her what had just happened. She's staying there with me until my dad's friend raced down there in his truck. We waited until the bus came to make sure that the other girl and the other students who came later got on the bus safely. Once I got to the school, I told the campus police officer what happened and tearfully gave him the best description of the creep that his vehicle as I could. Thankfully, he was caught later that day while I was at school, and I thanked the campus police officer profusely for getting that search started. Turns out the creep had been living in my neighborhood for about a year. He could have been watching me for that long, but I didn't even know. This is an experience I would not wish on my worst enemy. For months after, I was scared to walk by myself in my neighborhood, that the parents had to walk or drive me to my bus stop and wait for me because going by myself meant having flashbacks and embarrassing panic attacks. This guy may not have taken me, but he could have taken my ability to feel safe, and it took me a long time to gain that back. To the creep that did this to me, why? Probably because he's a pedophile. I used to live in a real rough area. I'm talking a super low-income apartment complex in southeastern Tennessee that had been raided by the Drug Task Force and cleared out multiple times in the past. The apartment complex was pretty spread out, with a lot of roads linking them all together. This place was almost like a small village, I guess, because most people in the complex would wander around outside or sit outside their apartment, and they would just socialize or do shady shit. A lot of small meth labs, dealers, and that sort of thing. They didn't tend to have a lot of problems because of a former addict myself. I didn't tend to be the snitching or moralizing sort. As long as whatever fuckery you were up to didn't impact or involve me, I didn't really give a fuck as long as nobody was getting actively harmed. So that's who I was. The quiet gay guy who lived with his boyfriend and 4 cats, who didn't fuck with anybody, but on the few incidents I'd be fucked with, I'd been known to not back down, so I wasn't often fucked with. People who also didn't tend to start shit with each other there, mostly just outsiders, and while I didn't make friends, I was at least a known member of the community as I lived there for about 2 years. I did not have the option to move out. I was poor as hell, and between me and my ex, I was the only one working. I was able to keep up with us and the cats fed and bills paid, but that was literally it, and sometimes I struggled to do that. At least the bills part. Can't say any of us ever went hungry, even if what we were eating was low-grade shit. I drove a shitty, old 2001 Jeep Grand Cherokee at the time. This vehicle was such a piece of shit that every time I got into it and turned the key, I'd pray to God, hoping that this wasn't the day that it finally stopped working. The vehicle had a ton of problems, some of which I managed to fix on my own, others not so much. That said, it was my lifeline, the only way I had to get to work. I'm not quite sure how this happened, but somehow word got around that I was trying to sell my Jeep. This was obviously not true because I needed the damn thing and knew it wasn't worth enough to sell in order to assure I could buy another vehicle. Nonetheless, I started having people approach me about it, offering me painfully low sums of money before I'd turn them away. I tried my damnedest to kill the for sale rumor, but it persisted up until the day I moved out of state and never looked back. So, one night, toward the end of my tenure at the complex after me and my ex had split and he moved out, I was alone and gaming on my PC. I believe I was playing Tekken. I heard a loud, frantic series of knocks at my front door. These apartments were small and shitty, so it was within visible eyesight of my bed in the bedroom, and this dude was knocking loudly. I get up, already stretched out because of the hour, and grabbed the knife I had and looked through the peephole. I could not really see anything because it was so dark, so I talked through the door. I asked who it was and what they wanted, in a commanding, almost aggressive tone, because I wasn't trying to look vulnerable. For reference, I'm just under 6 foot, around 220 pounds. I'm by no means small or weak. That said, I'm also not a one-man army or some kind of badass. I'm just as human as anyone else, and while I'm not one to run away from a fight, I'm also not the idiotic type to run towards them. I heard nothing at first, so I asked again, nothing again. I stood there, trying to listen for a few minutes. before returning to the bedroom, and a few minutes later, I heard the knocking start once again. This time, I went to my window to see if I could see anyone outside at all, and I saw several shadows lurking near my Jeep, parked just outside. Now, at this point, I was worried that they were going to try to break into it or steal it, so this time I actually opened the door. Standing in the little alley thing in front of my door was a group of 3 individuals. I only recognized one, who was standing in front of the other 2. I'd seen him around the complex and knew he lived there. I'm still packing the knife, but I'm not brandishing it at this point. I asked again what he wants and what the hell these people are doing knocking on my door at 1 a.m. and lingering around my Jeep. He said he heard it was for sale and he wanted to buy it, offering me the pitiful amount of money he had on him, legit, like $30 for it, and said him and his boys were just checking it out. I told him, look man, the Jeep isn't for sale, I don't know what the fuck you heard. And even if the Jeep was for sale, I wouldn't sell it to you for $30 fucking dollars. Now please, get the fuck off my property. After this, he gestured for his buddies to come over, and now I had 3 people standing shoulder to shoulder in the hallway leading up to my door, doing their best to intimidate me, before the guy asked, in a real fucked up tone, "You sure about that, boy?" Before I said, "Yeah, the fuck I am." After which I revealed the knife and ejected the blade from the handle. This was a larger knife with full brass knuckle guards and spike at the bottom of them. Not your typical small pocket knife by any means. His response to this was to call me a pussy for bringing out a weapon, to which I responded something along the lines of, "Says the motherfucker who comes here 3 deep," to which he just laughed at me. The sight of the knife did not put him off at all. I guess he figured I'd be too scared to use it, and that they could rush me before I got the chance. When I saw them inching their way forward, I sprung into action and started wildly thrusting and slashing the blade around in their general direction with wild abandonment, showing I had 0 issues with potentially killing or injuring all of them. I knew I was not likely to win a 3-on-1 fight, even with a knife, but I made it goddamn clear that if I was going down, I was taking at least one of them with me. They backed up and started spewing shit talk at me, including calling me a faggot and other choice words. I was known to be gay, even if most people act surprised when I tell them. I kept moving towards them as they backed up, showing that at this point they either were going to leave or someone was going to get stabbed. By the time I got to the end of the hallway to the lot where my Jeep was parked, I noticed 2 more people standing by the Jeep and internally swore at myself for just not going back inside. But I was in too deep now. At this point, I went all in and started yelling at the top of my lungs, acting like a bloodthirsty lunatic who was just out to hurt people in a similar manner to how people try to scare bears away. I was just trying to be as loud and as threatening as possible to really sell the idea that even if they took me out, at least one of them might end up dead as a result, and to be honest, I fully intended for it to go that way if the shit popped off. One of the guys by my Jeeps then brandished what looked to be a piece of wood at me as a threat, to which I responded, "Come at me with that stick and I'll slit your goddamn throat, you stupid motherfucker." I remember saying this very well because one of the other guys thought it was the funniest shit in the world and started laughing, not in a you won't do it sort of way, but in a manner that seemed like I was genuinely entertaining him. I was so hyped on adrenaline, my response to this was to slash at him, as he was one of the closer ones to me, at which he swore at me before running off, and all the rest followed suit. After this, I went back inside and stayed awake until sunrise to make sure that they did not come back before finally falling asleep on the couch by the door so I could hear if anything else happened outside and hopefully wake up if it did. Nothing more happened, and the next day after, I saw the guy who initialized the standoff with me as I was getting home from work. He followed me up to my apartment where I parked and apologized for what had happened. He said he was high at the time and also drunk, so he was feeling extra stupid. I told him not to fucking do it again. He then quickly approached me and hugged me in this real bro sort of way. I went along with it and told him to have a nice day before going back inside and settling down. I had no more incidences with him and his buddies ever again after this. Even though I played it off as not caring, it was mostly just to avoid further conflict. So, to the whacked out meth head and his friends who decided it was all in their best interest to intimidate me into selling my vehicle for $30, let's definitely not ever fucking meet again. This is possibly one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me, and a throwaway seems like a good idea when telling it. I just moved to London, and being a bit lonely and wanting to get into the dating scene, I tried doing the whole OkCupid thing. It was alright, and I honestly wasn't too active on it. I check on my account a few times a week and message some profiles of girls that I thought were pretty. 95% of the time my messages would go unanswered. I'd guessed it was mostly because many of my messages in retrospect were pretty uncreative and dry. One day, I was messing around looking through various profiles when I saw an extremely attractive girl and decided I had to message her. In my opinion, she was a perfect 10, not just the fact that she was a gorgeous blonde, but we liked a lot of the same music and movies, and well, I could actually send her a decent email because of all of the things we had in common. I also need to reiterate that most of her pictures were of her smoking, which definitely clouded my judgment. I should also mention that I'm a former military and Afghan veteran, so nothing really scares me. Almost immediately after pressing send, she responded. We messaged each other through the OkCupid messenger service for about a week, and I got to learn a lot about her. Her name was Aoife, and she was from Belfast. She told me she had a daughter named Rosen, which didn't really bother me, and had a very long, complicated story about how she grew up a Catholic in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and was an orphan at a young age. She seemed really driven and had such an amazing story. I had so many questions, and in all reality, a lot of respect for her, so it was really easy to keep talking to her. Within about another week, we started talking on the phone, and then sometimes on Skype. She'd never do an actual video chat, which at the time I didn't think was too weird, but she'd send me pictures of her and her daughter, friends, etc. For the most part, this whole thing seemed legit. The stories she had were pretty detailed, and she was talking about stuff that I really didn't know a lot about, and honestly couldn't comprehend. Then there were parts of the story that seemed to get kind of weird and didn't add up. At first, she told me she was a hairstylist at some swank place in central London. I don't really frequent Central a lot, so okay, no biggie. I just met her online. I wasn't going to head into Central to stalk her at work. Then she said that she owned a bar in Camden called the Lock Tavern, which I looked up on the internet and is a real place, and managed it on weekends. She had detailed stories about the bouncers and regulars, etc. This didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but okay. I mean, I guess you could do both jobs and be a full-time mom. It seemed odd, but she seemed driven, and she also seemed really hot, so who was I to judge? Again, I wasn't going to be super creeper and pop down there. I just took her word for it. She also said she lived in a really nice penthouse near Covent Garden, which, if anyone knows the London real estate market, didn't seem plausible on a hairdresser barmaid's wages. She explained this by saying that she had fallen into some money after the troubles. It seems kind of far-fetched, but again, without actually meeting her, who am I to judge? I started to notice some other weird things. She'd send me pictures, and in some of them, certain tattoos were present, and some they weren't. I figured she was just sending old pictures, but I remember that is what started to tip me off. The things were fishy, to say the least. But again, there's really nothing wrong with sending old pictures, and I had no real reason not to believe the photos were of Aoife. They all seemed like the same girl, and without the exception of the tattoos and some small changes in hair color, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. She would also send pictures of her daughter, Rosa, whom she claimed was 14. Finally, after talking to Aoife for a few weeks online, I asked her out on a date. I figured it was time I finally meet her. We were set to meet up on a Friday night, and on that Friday night she doesn't respond to a single text or call. I had nowhere to meet her. By around 9 p.m., she texts saying things got out of control at her pub, and she was really sorry, but she had to cancel. I was upset and should have bailed there, but I forgave her, and we agreed to set up another first meeting. Things from here really started to get weird. As I said, I was doing the online dating thing, and in this time, I'd met a few other girls. Another girl named Jo had asked me out, who turned out to be a psychopath, but that's just because she had an uncontrollable temper, and is nothing interesting enough to put on here. I went out with Jo one night in an area of London called Shoreditch, which isn't too far from where Aoife's pub was. While I was out, Aoife called and texted me a few times. I basically just ignored the calls. When the date was over, I said bye to Jo and went home and called Aoife. She asked where I was, and basically, well, I lied. I said I was out with a friend. Aoife didn't say anything, and we talked on the phone for a bit, and then said goodnight. The situation got strange a few nights later when Aoife caught me in a lie. She claimed to know that I was out with another girl. She knew which restaurant I was at and the night that I had been there. She knew what Jo had looked like. Aoife claimed that one of the bouncers from her pub knew what I looked like because she had shown photos of me to him, and he recognized me when I came through the doors at the restaurant in Shoreditch. This got odd. This was odd, to say the least. I basically told Aoife that the date was set up before I'd ever met her, and that we weren't really dating. She had no right to be upset, plus she'd stood me up. If anyone should be mad, it's me. To be honest, I forgot what really happened in this part of the story. I think we fought for a little bit. Didn't talk for a few weeks. Then one night she called me really late. It seemed off, so I answered. She was panicking. From what I could tell, she was suffering from sleep paralysis, which I know is scary, so I stayed on the phone with her until she went back to sleep. This happened a few more times. I really had no intention to date or even see her. I went home to the US for about a month, and while I did, kept limited contact. There was nothing too serious and my expectations were pretty low. After I'd gotten back to London, she invited me out. I don't remember much of the details, but she ended up canceling on me. I basically decided fuck it. I wasn't even upset. We had texted a little bit, but the communications really started to die down. I really didn't think much about it and went on with my life. Then one night, I entered the Twilight Zone. One day, I was in the King's Cross, St. Pancras area with a friend of mine from the States. He had to make a meeting nearby, so I was by myself in the area. That's when I got a text from Aoife. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I figured, hell, might as well finally meet this girl. I was in the same area of town, 2 stops away, and I didn't see any harm in it. She told me to meet her up in Camden, and she'd be in the Weatherspoons pub at noon. It wasn't a date, and at this point, I was really curious as to who she was. I'd literally spent hours talking and texting to this girl, so I don't know Camden that well, and I'm getting texts from her on the way up. As I'm trying to find the Weatherspoons, she's telling me she's at work and in the process of selling her share in the bar, but she's on her way. Another friend of hers is at the bar, but he's a great guy. You'll like him again. I was already there. Might as well meet her friend. Then I meet Reese. Reese was a tall, skinny ginger kid. He was about 21 and had a thick Irish accent. I walked up to him, shook his hand, and we got drinks. He seemed nice enough, and for as weird as the situation could potentially be, it wasn't all that uncomfortable. Another one of his friends was there as well. They seemed like 2 nerds in their early 20s. They talked about football and video games and all the other stuff 20-something-year-old kids talk about, mixed in with a little bit of politics and a couple of random questions about how do you know Aoife, etc. I'd been in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban a few years prior. The situation wasn't anything to be concerned about. Then I got a text from Aoife, something along the lines of, hey, getting tied up, be there in about an hour. Reese seemed nice enough, so we hung out for a few more beers and we moved to the next pub. Still no Aoife. Reese and his friend was nice. We did rounds, and fortunately, I hold my beer pretty well. Another apologetic text from Aoife rolls in. Fuck it, we're drinking, I thought, and we're having a good time. Reese would ask me random questions about Aoife, but basically I shrugged it off. Being one of the only few things we had in common, we bar hopped around London for a bit. At one point, I was in the queue to buy a round of drinks and felt like this guy was way too close to me. I turned around and saw an overweight old man with an ugly brown jacket and a pockmarked face. He had a crucifix tattooed on his neck. In all honesty, a typical barfly you'd see in a British pub. I'd say excuse me and walk past him. We'd continue to drink and bullshit the day away. By this time, it was like 2 or 3 o'clock and Aoife is nearing 3 hours late. I decide, fuck it, let's go to the Lock Tavern. Reese and his friend seemed cool with it. We get there, and there's 2 Irish tricolors flying above the place. Yeah, you can tell Aoife owns the place, huh? Reese said. The part of the story kinda added up. We went into her place. I text her to tell her we're there. Oh, great. I'm almost done with this. I'll be down in a minute. She never comes down. But this is when the story gets really, really weird. This other dude named Pete shows up, shakes Reese's hand, and Reese says, "Oh, you're here to meet Eva." I look at Reese, and he's like, this must seem weird. Eva is Eva's best friend. Now, this seemed really weird, but I needed to figure out what was going on. These two girls have almost exactly the same name. I had never heard Eva mention Eva before. I start talking to Pete, and Reese starts asking similar questions to him about Eva that he was asking me about Eva. But some of these questions were getting more serious. He was asking him things like, "Do you love her?" Pete's story then starts to sound eerily similar to mine. Pete meets Eva online. She's from Northern Ireland, has a daughter named Rosa. In his version, she's 12. He'd tried to meet up with her a few times, but it fell through. He was invited last minute to hang out today. Oh shit, this is weird, is all I could think. Something wasn't right. At this point, I knew that someone was getting played, probably me, and I was in some kind of game, but I needed to figure out what exactly was going on. Pete and I started to figure out things right about the same time. Right in front of Reese, who stuck his guns on the story remarkably well. They both have similar names. They both have daughters that are around the same age, with a really common Irish name. I'm not buying it, neither is Pete. I decide that the pub we are in might not be friendly territory, and I don't want to get shanghaied in Camden. So I suggest we leave. Eva sends me a text saying she's almost on her way down. Great, I said. Meets up with us in the street at some other pub. Pete and I start walking out. On the way out, I ask the bartender, "Hey, is Eva working today?" He responds, "No, mate. Eva hasn't worked here in 3 years." At this point, I know something really, really creepy is going on. We head to the next pub. I've got a good buzz going on, but I know I need to sober the fuck up fast. I think Pete might be a victim in this game too, but he might not be. He for sure can't be trusted. Reese and his buddy are suspect as well, but I don't have any proof yet, and my curiosity is keeping me there. We walk into another pub. Reese's friend says something to Reese, and I don't hear it. Neither does Pete. Reese loses it. He yells at his friend, and his friend basically says, "Fuck you, I'm out," and takes off. Pete and I are still trying to put things together. I find a table on an outdoor deck. It's quiet. I can think, and I can piece this together. It's amazing how fast you can sober up when you think you are in trouble. I ask Pete if he has any pictures of Eva, and Pete pulls out his phone. He shows me a picture that I'd seen before. "Wait, that's Rosa, Aoife's daughter." "No, mate, that's Aoife," Pete replies. This is making no sense. I'd been sent the same pictures of the same girl and been told it was Aoife's 14-year-old daughter. I showed Pete pictures that I had of Aoife. He claimed he'd never seen the girl in the photos before. Reese was sticking to the story that I had pictures of Aoife and Pete had pictures of Aoife, and that he wasn't sure why I thought the pic of Rosa. He also kept claiming that Aoife and Aoife texted him and they were on their way. That's when it dawned on me. I simply looked at Pete and asked him, "What number do you have in your phone for Eva?" Pete reads the number on his phone, and it turns out being the exact same number I had for Eva in my phone. If all the other clues hadn't added up, this one sent it over the edge. It also sent Pete out of the bar as he literally jumped over a table and ran out the door in a panic. At this point, it was just me and Reese. I don't think that he had overheard that we both had the same number for someone that he was telling me were two separate girls. Reese said that Eva and Aoife had texted him and that they were on their way. I don't know who Aoife and Eva are at this point, or if they even exist. I basically tell Reese that I think he's playing some kind of fucked up game and that he's more than suspect of wrongdoing. He took offense to this and physically threatened me. He wasn't a big dude and knew if he stepped to me, it wasn't going to end well. I basically walked right through him, knocking him into the door frame, and tore out of the bar. I headed straight for the tube. I needed to jump on the Northern Line and get home. I wasn't waiting for anything. At this point, I have no idea what the fuck is going on. At best, I'd been caught up in some weird fucking catfish scam. At worst, I was almost a victim of a snuff movie. I get on the tube and there's a guy right behind me. I look at him. He's overweight, pockmarked face, brown jacket. We make eye contact. I look up at his neck and there's a crucifix tattoo. It's the same guy from earlier. I'm a bit worried, but I've been under worse pressure before in my life. I calmly sat down on the train. The train was being held in Camden for some reason and wasn't moving. That's when who jumps out of the same carriage as the two of us, Reese. I could have sworn he made eye contact and gave a nod to the man in the brown jacket. At this point, I played dumb that they were there. On the London Tube, there's a certain dinging noise that's made right before the doors close. I waited to hear that noise and then bolted out of the door. I ran around and doubled back on the tube several times. When I finally got back home, I texted a friend in New Cross and told her I was scared I was being followed. She was having a party that night and invited me over. I really didn't want to head home alone. At this point, I think I doubled back and switched lines enough that if Reese and the man in the brown coat were following me, I had lost them. I made it to New Cross safe and sound. I had a few calls from Aoife the next few days, but never wanted to answer them. She also sent a few texts saying we needed to talk. Eventually, she stopped calling and texting altogether. I have a few theories on the whole issue. One of my friends thinks that Reese and Aoife are the same person. I wouldn't rule it out, but the person I talked to on the phone definitely sounded like a woman.